background. First and foremost, I'm taking no credit for this bill. I was not in the drafting committee. I would like to think that if we had any impact, it was in making the bill more gender sensitive than what it was, than its initial form. And when I say we, I'm talking about members of civil society. In addition to lecturing in law at UCT, I'm also a member of a network called the Recognition of Muslim Marriages Forum. And I'm a member of an organization called Shura Ya Bafazi. Now, it's not a very well heard, you wouldn't have heard about Shura Ya Bafazi because we've been extremely quiet. We were established in about 2000, also a number of individuals coming together when we realized that we needed an organization that specifically represented the interests of women affected by Islamic law issues. We work in conjunction with organizations like the Muslim Youth Movement and other types of progressive organizations, but we just felt that we needed to have a group that specifically earmarked that as a priority. And so Shura Ya Bafazi was born. Shura, Arabic for consultation, Ya Bafazi, Kosa, for of women, right? Consultation of women. Due to funding constraints along the line, we filtered down to 2 members, both of which had to leave the country at some point to go and study abroad. I came back. My colleague is still abroad. So Shura at the moment really just involves itself in advocacy efforts. When we're able to get the organization off the ground again, we want to start working on doing litigation and kind of broader-based issues. Recognition of Muslim Marriages Forum, as I said, is a network of which Shura is a member. Right? So that's just kind of contextualize my involvement in the forum. So I'm on the forum as a member of Shura, but also as an academic from UCT. And in about 3 years ago, again, because the project committee had started drafting the bill it started the process to draft the bill in about 1999, 2000, when they were established. After 4 years of consultation with different groups within the Muslim community and broader secular society, they eventually put together a bill that they submitted to the Ministry of Justice and Constitutional Development. And the bill sat on the minister's desk from 2003 until 2010. So a few years ago, we decided this was just unacceptable. We needed to start doing something to get the process moving along. And we recognized that it was also, the ministry didn't clearly or give a clear indication as to why they were taking so long. So, what I'm going to say to you now is speculative, but I think it's kind of calculated speculation and sort of reasonable speculation. On the one hand, it's quite possible that there was no political will from time to time. So, depending on which minister was in office, they either started moving forward with the bill or they didn't, right? And we saw that as the different ministers came through the office. The other reason that the ministry actually gave was that there wasn't sufficient consensus around the bill within the community. Our response to that was, you're never going to get 100% consensus on a controversial bill. We've had so many controversial bills coming through Parliament, and in spite of the controversy, they get enacted. So what makes this one any different? Right? So the Recognition of Muslim Marriages Forum now represents quite a number. We started out with a handful of people, and we now have people from other parts of the country who've also come on board. And Fatima is also a member. Right, Fatima? I'm only speaking for people. So as a forum, our specific objective was to campaign and advocate for the legal recognition of Muslim marriages, in whichever form that recognition took, right? But we're not saying that it should just take any form. We're saying that first and foremost, the Muslim marriages need to be legally recognized, because we've realized, research I think has shown, and I've done a lot of work on this also, and there's a strong indication that without legal recognition, Muslims in South Africa are going to remain a marginalized, disadvantaged community, and women particularly are negatively affected, right? Because they don't have the same kinds of benefits that their civil law counterparts have. They're subjected to discriminatory rules and practices within their community that they can't challenge either with the ulama or through secular forums. And that the only way they have any chance of obtaining relief is if there is some kind of state intervention intervening to provide that protection. Because we found that the secular relief that they have at the moment is insufficient, which is why we're advocating for this bill to be enacted. So Aisha is correct. When the bill was drafted, in about 2003, when it was submitted to the minister, there was a sense that there was a kind of general consensus among the different groups, right? And that even though the bill doesn't represent the interests of all parties, and now when I'm talking about the different kinds of groups, I'm saying that on the one extreme you have what one can loosely term Muslim extremists who reject the bill outright and describe it as a kufr bill. Right? The Al-Jama'ah party are going around and saying, take the bill, throw it in the rubbish bin. Right? That's exactly what they're saying to people. On the other extreme of the spectrum, we have human rights activists who are saying the same thing. They rejected the bill outright, but for a different reason. Okay? While the extremists are saying this is a kufr bill, this is an un-Islamic bill, okay? We cannot support this. There are human rights activists who are arguing to enact the bill means you're going to be codifying discriminatory Muslim family law rules and practices. Right? Rather leave the status quo as it is, and let's work on secular options for the community. Then there are other voices in the community, right? So now I'm also going to be using these labels very loosely. If you can say certain members of the ulama who may describe themselves as moderate members of the ulama, recognize that the bill is or legislation to recognize Muslim marriage is an opportunity for them to get some kind of legal authority, right? To have their decision in the community given legal enforceability. So they okay with the idea of this legislation. They do have problems with it in its current form, for example, that it requires a secular court to interpret Islamic law, right? And there's no requirement, as there was in the previous versions, for Islamic law experts to sit as assessors. But we can talk about that afterwards, as you work through the bill, how we can actually work that in without it being specified in the bill, and what form that would take. But they see that that's a carrot for them, right? That they can get their decisions legally enforced through that medium. Then we also have human rights and women's rights activists within the community, and who say, we acknowledge that legislation like this does pose the risk of these Sharia rules becoming codified, but they cannot be codified carte blanche, because we live in a secular society, we're governed by. So then, of course, we come to the question, which arose out of one of the groups, is that the definition of a Muslim marriage. So the bill speaks very much about, says quite explicitly that it's a contract between a man and a woman, right? Where the nikah is performed, and then it talks about what constitutes a nikah as well, right? It talks about the normal formula that gets uttered for a nikah. And the question was, and although it wasn't articulated in this way, but is it Lavim? No? I think what you didn't articulate quite in this way, but I think what you were sort of pointing towards was the fact that provision in fact discriminates against same-sex couples on the basis of their sexual orientation.